I never expected that a single comment about my appearance would lead me to completely reshape someone else's future. But sometimes life has a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. At 68 years old, I thought I had experienced every type of cruelty the world could offer. But standing in my own kitchen while my son's girlfriend looked at me with disgust and declared my wrinkles revolting was a new kind of pain I wasn't prepared for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday, in my comfortable suburban home in Riverside Heights. I had been living alone for the past 5 years since my husband Richard passed away, and I had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of my daily routine. The house felt too large for just me sometimes, but it held 43 years of memories that I wasn't ready to abandon. My son Marcus had been encouraging me to downsize, but every room contained pieces of the life Richard and I had built together. Marcus was my pride and joy, my only child who had grown into a successful architect with his own firm downtown. At 34, he was everything Richard and I had hoped he would become: intelligent, ambitious, and kind-hearted. Or so I thought. 6 months earlier, he had started bringing around his new girlfriend, Vanessa, a 28-year-old marketing executive with platinum blonde hair and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's monthly salary. From the moment I met Vanessa, I sensed something artificial about her demeanor. She had a way of speaking that felt rehearsed, as if every conversation was a performance designed to impress. Her laugh was too loud, her compliments too effusive, and her interest in our family stories too obviously feigned. But Marcus was completely smitten, hanging on her every word and constantly seeking her approval in ways that made me uncomfortable. That Tuesday morning, I had invited them both over for brunch, something I did regularly to maintain my connection with Marcus. I had spent the previous evening preparing his favorite meal: blueberry pancakes from scratch, turkey sausage, and fresh fruit salad. The dining room table was set with my best china, the same pattern Richard had given me for our 10th wedding anniversary. I was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes on the griddle, when I heard them arrive. Marcus's key turned in the front door, followed by the sound of Vanessa's high heels clicking across the hardwood floor. I smoothed down my hair and checked my reflection in the window above the sink. At 68, I knew I showed my age. My brown hair had streaks of silver that I had stopped dyeing after Richard died, deciding to embrace the natural process of aging. My face bore the lines of decades of laughter, worry, and sun exposure from the garden I tended with devotion. "Mom, we're here," Marcus called out as they entered the kitchen. He looked handsome in his casual weekend clothes, his dark hair slightly tousled, and his face relaxed in a way it rarely was during his busy work weeks. Vanessa followed behind him, wearing designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Perfect timing," I said, turning from the stove with a smile. "The pancakes are almost ready. Vanessa, how are you feeling? Marcus mentioned you had that important presentation this week." Vanessa barely acknowledged my question, instead scanning the kitchen with an expression I couldn't quite read. Her gaze lingered on the outdated appliances, the vintage wallpaper, and the collection of ceramic roosters I had been collecting for decades. "Oh, fine," she said dismissively, pulling out her phone to check messages. Marcus seemed oblivious to her lack of engagement, already reaching for the orange juice in the refrigerator. "Mom, this smells incredible. You always make the best breakfasts." His enthusiasm was genuine, and for a moment I felt the warmth of our old connection before Vanessa's. Presents complicated everything. "I hope you're both hungry," I said, plating the golden pancakes on the serving dish. "I made plenty, and there's fresh maple syrup from the farmer's market." As we settled around the dining room table, I tried to engage Vanessa in conversation, asking about her work and her interests. She responded with minimal enthusiasm, often looking at Marcus as if waiting for him to rescue her from the boring obligation of talking to his mother. The dynamic felt strange and uncomfortable, but I pushed aside my concerns, focusing on enjoying the time with my son. The conversation flowed more naturally when Vanessa excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Marcus and me alone at the table. We talked about his latest architectural project, a sustainable housing development that had him excited about the future of urban design. His eyes lit up as he described the innovative features he was incorporating, and I felt proud of the passionate, creative man he had become. "You know, Mom," he said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "Vanessa and I have been talking about the future. About taking the next step in our relationship." My heart skipped a beat. I knew what he was implying, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. She's really special, and I think she could be the one. I squeezed his hand, trying to keep my expression neutral. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I just want you to be happy." The words felt hollow even as I spoke them, because I wasn't sure Vanessa made him happy in the way he deserved. When Vanessa returned from her call, her mood seemed even more irritated than before. She slumped into her chair with an exaggerated sigh and pushed her food around her plate without eating. "Sorry about that," she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "Work drama. My boss is being completely unreasonable about the timeline for the campaign launch." "That sounds stressful," I offered, hoping to show some sympathy. "The marketing world must be very demanding." Vanessa looked at me with barely concealed impatience. "You wouldn't understand. It's not like it was in your generation when women just stayed home and didn't have real careers." The comment stung, but I tried to brush it off. "Actually, I worked for 35 years as a librarian at the university. I helped establish their digital archive system and managed a staff of 12 people. I kept my tone light, not wanting to create tension, but wanting to correct her assumption." "Oh," she said, clearly uninterested in learning anything that might contradict her preconceived notions about me. "Well, that's different from what I do. I'm responsible for million-dollar budgets and international campaigns." Marcus jumped in, trying to smooth over the awkward moment. "Mom has always been incredibly hardworking. She practically single-handedly put me through college while Dad was building his accounting practice." I appreciated his support, but I could see Vanessa rolling her eyes at what she apparently considered excessive praise for accomplishments she deemed insignificant. The meal continued with stilted conversation, and I found myself counting the minutes until it would be socially acceptable for them to leave. After we finished eating, I suggested we move to the living room for coffee. I had prepared Richard's favorite blend, and I thought the change of scenery might help the atmosphere. Vanessa perched on the edge of the sofa as if she was afraid of getting too comfortable, while Marcus settled into his father's old recliner, a piece of furniture that held countless memories of weekend mornings and late-night conversations. "Mom, I've been thinking," Marcus said, accepting the coffee cup I offered him. "Maybe it's time you considered moving somewhere smaller. This house is so big for just one person, and the maintenance must be overwhelming." I had heard this suggestion before, and while I understood his practical concerns, I wasn't ready to let go of the home where I had raised him and built a life with Richard. "I manage just fine, sweetheart. Mrs. Chen next door."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Helps with the heavy yard work, and I have a cleaning service that comes twice a month." Vanessa snorted softly. "A cleaning service? For this old place? That seems like a waste of money." Her tone was condescending, and I felt my patience beginning to wear thin. "It's worth it to me to maintain my independence and keep the house in good condition." "Independence?" Vanessa laughed, and there was something cruel in the sound. "Look at yourself. You're clinging to this ancient house, wearing clothes that went out of style 20 years ago, and pretending like you're still relevant in a world that's moved on without you." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Vanessa, that's not fair." But she was just getting started. She stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, examining the family photographs with obvious disdain. "Marcus, honey, you need to understand something about women like your mother. They refuse to accept reality. They think they can hide behind their little routines and their outdated decorations and pretend that time hasn't passed them by." I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger, but I tried to maintain my composure. "I'm not sure what you mean by women like me." Vanessa turned to face me directly, and what I saw in her expression was pure contempt. "I mean women who have given up, who have let themselves go completely and expect everyone around them to pretend they don't notice." She gestured toward me with dismissive wave of her hand. "Look at you, Margaret. Your wrinkles are disgusting. Your hair is gray and lifeless. You dress like someone who stopped caring about herself decades ago." The words hit me like physical blows. I had always been conscious of aging, but I had tried to do it gracefully, accepting the natural changes while maintaining my dignity. To hear someone speak about my appearance with such vicious cruelty, especially in my own home, left me speechless. "And the worst part," Vanessa continued, seeming to enjoy my shock, "is that you think Marcus should just accept this. You think he should bring his girlfriend around to visit his decrepit mother and pretend like it's not embarrassing for him." "Vanessa, stop," Marcus finally said, his voice sharp. "You're being completely out of line." But the damage was done. I sat frozen in my chair, feeling smaller and more worthless than I had since the dark days immediately following Richard's death. Vanessa had targeted not just my appearance, but my sense of worth as a person, my relationship with my son, and my right to exist in my own space without apology. "I'm just being honest," Vanessa said, shrugging as if her honesty was some kind of virtue. "Someone needs to tell her the truth about how she looks and how it affects the people around her." I found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I think you should leave." Vanessa smirked. "See? She can't handle the truth. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus. Your mother lives in a fantasy world where everyone is supposed to pretend she's not falling apart." Marcus stood up, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "We're leaving. Now." He looked at me with apologetic eyes, but he didn't contradict anything Vanessa had said. He didn't defend me or tell her that her words were unacceptable. He simply wanted to escape the uncomfortable situation as quickly as possible. As they gathered their things, Vanessa made one final comment that would haunt me for days to come. "Margaret, maybe it's time you considered some cosmetic procedures. There are treatments that could help with those deep wrinkles and age spots. Of course, at your age, there's only so much that can be done, but it might help Marcus feel less ashamed when he brings people around." They left me sitting in my living room, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of a life I had thought was meaningful and full of love. The coffee grew cold in my hands as I stared at my reflection in the dark television screen, seeing myself through Vanessa's eyes for the first time. Was I really as pathetic as she had made me feel? Had I become someone my own son was embarrassed to be seen with? The rest of that day passed in a blur of self-doubt and wounded pride. I found myself examining every mirror in the house, cataloging each wrinkle and age spot that Vanessa had found so offensive. I opened my closet and saw my practical, comfortable clothing through new eyes, wondering if I had indeed given up on presenting myself as an attractive, vital woman. But as the shock began to wear off, another feeling started to take its place. It began as a small spark of indignation that gradually grew into something much more powerful. Who was this young woman to judge me so harshly? What gave her the right to speak to me with such cruelty in my own home? And why had Marcus allowed her to treat his mother with such disrespect? That evening, I called my sister Patricia, who lived 3 states away but had always been my closest confidant. Patricia was 2 years younger than me but had aged with the same natural grace, embracing her silver hair and laugh lines as badges of a life well lived. "Margaret, you sound upset," she said the moment she heard my voice. "What's wrong?" I told her everything, from Vanessa's cruel comments to Marcus's failure to defend me. Patricia listened without interruption, and I could hear her growing anger in the long pauses between my sentences. "That little witch," Patricia finally said, her voice tight with fury. "How dare she speak to you that way? And Marcus just stood there and let her? He told her to stop, but he didn't really defend me. I think he might actually agree with her, Patricia. Maybe I have let myself go. Maybe I am an embarrassment." "Margaret Eleanor Sinclair," Patricia said, using my full name the way our mother used to when she wanted to make a point. "You listen to me right now. You are one of the most beautiful, intelligent, accomplished women I know. You raised a son who became successful and kind. At least I thought he was kind. You had a marriage that lasted 4 decades and was built on love and respect. You worked your entire adult life, contributed to your community, and have been a devoted mother and grandmother figure to half the neighborhood kids." Her words helped, but they couldn't completely erase the sting of Vanessa's attack. But what if she's right? What if I have become invisible, irrelevant? "Honey," The only thing that makes you invisible is people choosing not to see your worth. And if Marcus's girlfriend can't see what an amazing woman you are, then she's the one with the problem, not you. After I hung up with Patricia, I spent a long time thinking about my life and the choices I had made. Richard and I had lived modestly, despite having significant resources. He had been incredibly successful in his accounting practice, specializing in investment management for wealthy clients. Over the decades, he had made savvy investments that had grown our portfolio far beyond what anyone in our circle knew. We had kept our wealth private, living in the same house we had bought as newlyweds, driving practical cars, and spending money only on experiences and education rather than luxury goods. Richard had believed that true wealth was measured in relationships and personal fulfillment, not in material displays. After his death, I had continued living the same way, managing our investments through the firm Richard had trusted for decades. What Vanessa didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, was that I was worth considerably more than either of them could imagine. My investment portfolio had grown to over $18 million, spread across real estate, stocks, and bonds that Richard had carefully selected over the years. I owned 3 rental properties in the downtown district that generated substantial monthly income, and I had a trust fund that would eventually pass to Marcus upon my death. I had never told Marcus about the full extent of my financial resources, because Richard and I had agreed that he should make his own way in the world. We had paid for his education and helped him with his first house down payment, but we wanted him to develop his own work ethic and sense of accomplishment. I had planned to surprise him with his inheritance when I felt he was mature enough to handle it responsibly. But now, sitting in my living room and replaying Vanessa's cruel words, I began to wonder if that plan needed to change. If Marcus was going to allow someone to treat his mother with such contempt, perhaps he wasn't the man I had thought he was. And if Vanessa saw me as nothing more than an aging embarrassment, maybe it was time she learned exactly who she was dealing with. The next morning, I made an appointment with my financial advisor, Thomas Whitmore, who had taken over Richard's accounts after his retirement. Thomas was a sharp man in his 50s, who had always treated me with the respect and attention that major clients deserved. He had offices in the most prestigious building downtown, and his client list included some of the wealthiest families in the state. "Mrs. Sinclair," Thomas said as I settled into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, "it's wonderful to see you. I hope you're doing well. I have your quarterly reports ready for review." "Actually, Thomas, I'm here about something else today. I need to make some changes to my portfolio allocation and my estate planning." Thomas raised an eyebrow. In the 5 years since Richard's death, I had been a remarkably hands-off investor, trusting his judgment and rarely making major changes to our carefully constructed financial plan. "Of course. What kind of changes are you considering?" "I want to understand my liquid assets and what options I have for making immediate, substantial transfers. May I ask, what's prompting this review? Are you considering a major purchase, or perhaps looking at charitable giving?" I smiled, thinking about Vanessa's assumption that I was just a pathetic old woman clinging to an outdated lifestyle. "Let's call it an educational opportunity. I want to teach someone a lesson about making assumptions." Thomas pulled up my accounts on his computer and began reviewing the numbers. "You have approximately $4.2 million in immediately liquid assets between your money market accounts and short-term CDs. Your stock portfolio is currently valued at just over $8 million, and most of those positions could be liquidated within 3 to 5 business days if necessary. What about the properties?" "The rental properties are currently valued at approximately $3.8 million total. Your personal residence is worth about $1.4 million, given the recent appreciation in your neighborhood. The trust accounts bring your total net worth to just over $18.6 million. The numbers were even higher than I had realized, thanks to the strong market performance over the past few years. "Thomas, I want you to help me with a rather unusual request. I want to create a scholarship fund, and I want to do it in a way that will make a very public statement." "Certainly. What kind of scholarship were you thinking about?" "Something focused on older women returning to education or starting new careers. Women who have been dismissed or undervalued because of their age." I thought about Vanessa's comments about irrelevance and giving up. "I want to call it the Late Bloomers Foundation, and I want to fund it with $2 million initially. Thomas nodded, making notes. That's a wonderful cause. Very generous. But here's the unusual part. I want the announcement of the foundation to be made at a specific location, in front of specific people. I want to control exactly how this information becomes public. That's certainly possible. We can coordinate with whatever venue or event you have in mind. I spent the next hour working out the details with Thomas. The foundation would provide scholarships and grants to women over 50 who were pursuing education or career changes. It would also fund programs that addressed ageism in the workplace and promoted the value of experienced women in society. Most importantly, it would be launched with a public ceremony that would make it impossible for anyone to ignore. Mrs. Sinclair, Thomas said as we wrapped up our meeting, may I say that this is one of the most meaningful philanthropic initiatives I've helped establish. Your husband would be very proud. Thank you, Thomas. Richard always believed that the best revenge was success. I think he would appreciate the irony of this situation. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Thomas and a team of attorneys to establish the Late Bloomers Foundation. We arranged for the announcement to take place at the annual Riverside Heights Chamber of Commerce dinner, an event that drew several hundred business leaders from across the region. Marcus attended this dinner every year as a member of the architecture community, and I knew he would be there with Vanessa. During those 2 weeks, Marcus called me several times, clearly uncomfortable about what had happened during their visit. But he never directly addressed Vanessa's behavior, or offered a genuine apology for allowing her to speak to me so cruelly. Instead, he made vague comments about misunderstandings, and suggested that we all just move past the incident. Mom, I think maybe we all got a little heated that day, he said during one phone call. Vanessa feels bad about how things went. Does she? I asked. Has she said that directly to you? There was a pause. Well, she mentioned that maybe she came across stronger than she intended. Marcus, your girlfriend told me that my wrinkles were disgusting and that you were embarrassed to be seen with me. She suggested I needed cosmetic surgery to be acceptable in your social circles. That wasn't coming across too strong, that was deliberate cruelty. I know she shouldn't have said those things, but Mom, you have to understand the pressure she's under at work. She's been stressed and she wasn't thinking clearly. The fact that he was still making excuses for her behavior confirmed what I had already suspected. Marcus had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. I see. Well, I hope her stress levels improve. 2 days before the chamber dinner, I received an unexpected visit from Vanessa herself. She arrived at my door on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in another expensive outfit, and carrying what appeared to be a peace offering, an elaborate floral arrangement. Margaret, she said when I opened the door, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to talk to you about what happened the other day. I was surprised by her initiative, though I suspected Marcus had prompted this visit. Please come in, I said, curious to hear what she had to say. We sat in the living room where she had delivered her cruel assessment of my appearance. This time her demeanor was different, more controlled, more calculated. She had clearly prepared for this conversation. I want to apologize for my comments about your appearance, she began, setting the flowers on the coffee table. I was having a difficult week at work, and I took out my frustration on you unfairly. Thank you for the apology, I said carefully. Though I have to ask, do you actually think you were wrong, or are you just sorry that Marcus was upset about it? She seemed taken aback by my direct question. I think I expressed myself poorly. What I meant to say was that I care about Marcus, and I want him to be proud of his family. Sometimes that means making difficult suggestions about how we present ourselves. So she wasn't actually apologizing for the content of her comments, just for the way she had delivered them. I see. And you still believe that my appearance is something Marcus should be ashamed of? I think we all have room for improvement, she said diplomatically. I just think there are ways to enhance our natural beauty that might help us feel more confident. The condescension was still there, just wrapped in softer language. She still saw me as someone who needed to be fixed, improved, made more acceptable for Marcus's sake. Vanessa, I said, leaning forward slightly, can I ask you something? What do you think you know about me? She looked puzzled by the question. What do you mean? I mean, what assumptions have you made about who I am, what my life has been like, what my resources and capabilities are? She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'm not sure I understand the question. You've made it clear that you see me as someone who has given up, who has become irrelevant and embarrassing. I'm curious about what information you're basing those judgments on. Well, she said slowly, you live in this old house. You dress very simply. You seem to spend most of your time alone. Marcus has mentioned that you've been struggling with loneliness since his father died. Anything else? You just seem like someone who has settled into being old, who has accepted that her best years are behind her. I nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting. And what would you say if I told you that your assumptions were completely wrong? What do you mean? What if I told you that I chose to live simply not because I can't afford better, but because I don't value material displays? What if my quiet lifestyle is actually the result of careful planning and substantial resources? What if the woman you see as pathetic and irrelevant is actually in a position to make decisions that could significantly impact your future? Vanessa laughed nervously. I'm not sure I follow. You will, I said, standing up to signal that the conversation was over. You'll understand very soon. She left looking confused and slightly worried, which was exactly how I wanted her to feel. In 48 hours, she would discover that the decrepit old woman she had insulted was about to become one of the most talked about philanthropists in the region. The night before the chamber dinner, I selected my outfit carefully. Instead of my usual understated clothing, I chose an elegant navy dress that I had purchased but never worn, along with the pearl necklace Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary. I made an appointment at the salon for hair and makeup, asking them to create a sophisticated look that would photograph well. When I looked in the mirror before leaving for the dinner, I saw a woman who looked confident, successful, and powerful. The wrinkles Vanessa had found so disgusting were still there, but they were part of a face that radiated intelligence and dignity. My gray hair was styled in a way that looked intentional and elegant rather than neglected. The chamber dinner was held at the Grand Riverside Hotel, the most prestigious venue in our city. The ballroom was filled with round tables, each seating 8 people, and a raised platform at the front where the evening's speakers would present. I had arranged to sit at a table near the front, where I would be visible to the entire room during my presentation. Marcus and Vanessa were seated 3 tables away, and I could see them clearly throughout the dinner. Marcus looked handsome in his dark suit, and Vanessa was wearing a stunning black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They were engaged in animated conversation with their table mates, and Marcus seemed relaxed and happy in a way that reminded me of better times. During the cocktail hour before dinner, several people approached me to comment on how lovely I looked. Mrs. Henderson from the Historical Society said I was absolutely glowing, and Dr. Martinez from the university remarked that I looked more vibrant than he had seen me since Richard's death. Their compliments felt genuine and helped boost my confidence for what was ahead. The dinner itself was excellent. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and a chocolate dessert that was almost too beautiful to eat. I made pleasant conversation with my table mates, including 2 other widows who had become successful entrepreneurs after their husbands' deaths. Their stories reminded me that there were many ways to reinvent oneself later in life. As the evening's program began, the chamber president, Robert Drake, introduced the various speakers and honorees. I listened politely to presentations about economic development, new business initiatives, and community partnerships. Finally, Robert approached the podium for what he announced as a, quote, special presentation about an exciting new philanthropic initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert said, tonight we have the privilege of announcing the launch of a groundbreaking foundation that will address an often overlooked issue in our community. The Late Bloomers Foundation, established with an initial endowment of $2 million, will provide scholarships and support for women over 50 who are pursuing education or career changes. I saw Marcus's head turn sharply toward the front of the room. He had clearly recognized the foundation name and was trying to process what he was hearing. This foundation, Robert continued, addresses the reality that many women face age discrimination when they try to re-enter the workforce or pursue new opportunities later in life. It will fund not only individual scholarships but also research and advocacy programs designed to change societal attitudes about the value of experienced women. Vanessa was looking around the room with mild interest, clearly not yet understanding the significance of the announcement. "The founder of this initiative," Robert said, "is someone many of you know as a longtime member of our community. She worked for over 3 decades as a librarian at State University, where she pioneered digital archive systems and mentored countless students. She has been a devoted wife, mother, and neighbor. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing Mrs. Margaret Sinclair." The spotlight found me at my table, and I rose to acknowledge the applause. I could see Marcus's face clearly now, and his expression was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been pride. Vanessa, however, looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth was literally hanging open as she stared at me standing in the spotlight, being celebrated by hundreds of the city's business and civic leaders. Robert continued his introduction as I made my way to the podium. "Mrs. Sinclair has been quietly managing significant investment portfolios and real estate holdings for decades, and she has chosen to use those resources to make a powerful statement about the value and potential of women who refuse to be dismissed because of their age." I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, looking out over the crowd. The ballroom was completely silent, every person focused on what I was about to say. I found Marcus and Vanessa in the crowd and held their gaze for a moment before beginning to speak. "Thank you, Robert, and thank you all for this warm reception. When I decided to establish the Late Bloomers Foundation, I was motivated by a personal experience that opened my eyes to how casually our society discards women once they reach a certain age. I had written my speech carefully, but now, looking directly at Vanessa, I felt compelled to speak from the heart. Recently, someone told me that my wrinkles were disgusting. They suggested that I had given up on myself and become an embarrassment to the people who knew me. They assumed that because I dress simply and live quietly, I must be irrelevant and pathetic. A murmur went through the crowd. This was clearly not the typical philanthropic speech they were expecting. That person was wrong on multiple levels. First, they were wrong to judge anyone's worth based on their appearance or lifestyle choices. Second, they were wrong to assume that a woman's value decreases with age. And third, they were catastrophically wrong about who I am and what I'm capable of. I could see Vanessa sinking lower in her chair, finally understanding that this entire presentation was directed at her. The Late Bloomers Foundation represents my belief that women of experience have tremendous value to offer society. We have wisdom earned through decades of challenges overcome, relationships navigated, and obstacles conquered. We have financial independence that allows us to make choices based on principles rather than necessity. And we have the freedom that comes from no longer caring what small-minded people think of our appearance. The applause was building, and I could see several women in the audience nodding enthusiastically. This foundation will provide $2 million in its first year to support women who refuse to accept society's limitations. Women who are starting businesses at 60, returning to school at 55, or launching new careers at 70. Women who understand that wrinkles are simply evidence of a life fully lived. I looked directly at Vanessa again. To anyone who has been made to feel invisible or irrelevant because of your age, I want you to know that you have allies, you have resources, and you have someone who believes that your best years may very well still be ahead of you. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 3 minutes. As I returned to my seat, dozens of people approached me to offer congratulations, share their own stories of ageism, and ask how they could support the foundation. The energy in the room was electric, and I felt more empowered and purposeful than I had in years. Throughout the remainder of the evening, I could see Marcus and Vanessa having what appeared to be an intense conversation at their table. Vanessa's face was flushed, and she kept gesturing in my direction. Marcus looked torn between embarrassment and something that might have been admiration. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Marcus finally approached my table. He looked uncertain, and perhaps a little intimidated, which was not an expression I was used to seeing on my confident son's face. "Mom," he said quietly, "could we talk privately for a moment?" I followed him to a quieter corner of the ballroom, noting that Vanessa remained seated at their table, apparently unwilling or unable to face me directly. "Mom, I had no idea. Marcus began, his voice strained. About the foundation, about your resources, about any of it. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because your father and I believed you should make your own way in the world. We wanted you to develop your own sense of accomplishment and self-worth, not depend on family wealth. But $2 million, Mom. You just gave away $2 million. I can afford it, Marcus. Your father was very successful, and I've been a careful steward of his legacy. He ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process this new information. I feel like I don't know who you are. I'm the same person I've always been. The only thing that's changed is your perception of me. Vanessa feels terrible about what she said to you. She had no idea about your financial situation. And if I had been the poor, pathetic woman she thought I was, would her comments have been acceptable then? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally said. They wouldn't have been. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. When Vanessa called me disgusting and suggested I was an embarrassment to you, did any part of you agree with her? The question hung between us, and I could see him struggling with how to respond. Finally, he met my eyes. I thought maybe she had a point about you isolating yourself too much. About not taking care of yourself the way you used to when Dad was alive. His honesty hurt, but I appreciated it more than the deflections and excuses he had been offering. And do you still think that now? Mom, you look incredible tonight. You're confident and powerful and amazing. I'm proud to be your son. I'm the same woman I was 2 weeks ago, Marcus. The only thing that's different is that now you know I have money and community recognition. He had no response to that, because we both knew it was true. I want you to think about something. I continued. The woman who raised you, who supported your dreams, who sacrificed to give you opportunities, that woman deserved your respect and protection, regardless of her bank account balance. The fact that you're proud of me tonight, after years of treating me like an obligation, tells me more about your character than I wanted to know. Mom, that's not fair. I never treated you like an obligation. You allowed your girlfriend to verbally abuse me in my own home. You made excuses for her behavior instead of defending me. You stood there quietly while she dismantled my self-worth piece by piece. That's not the behavior of a loving son, Marcus. That's the behavior of someone who values their romantic relationship more than their family obligations. Marcus's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You're being dramatic, Mom. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad for whom? Not that bad for you because you weren't the target of her cruelty? Or not that bad for her because she got to express her true feelings without consequences? I kept my voice level, but I could feel years of suppressed frustration bubbling to the surface. Marcus, your girlfriend told me I was disgusting and that you were ashamed of me. In what universe is that not bad? He looked across the ballroom toward Vanessa, who was now standing by the exit doors, clearly wanting to leave. She's waiting for me, Mom. Can we continue this conversation later? Of course she is. And of course you're going to go to her instead of working this out with your mother. I picked up my purse from the table. Go ahead, Marcus. Go comfort the woman who insulted your mother. Make sure she knows that her feelings are more important than mine. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? You're cutting short a conversation about her cruelty toward me because she's uncomfortable. You're prioritizing her emotional comfort over addressing the damage she did to our relationship. I looked at him steadily. That tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie. I walked away from him then, accepting congratulations from several other attendees who wanted to discuss the foundation. By the time I looked around for Marcus again, he and Vanessa had already left the ballroom. They hadn't said goodbye, hadn't thanked me for the dinner invitation I had extended weeks earlier, hadn't acknowledged that this evening had been one of the most significant of my recent life. The drive home gave me time to process what had just happened. I had revealed my financial resources and community standing in the most public way possible, and while it had been satisfying to see Vanessa's shock, I realized that it hadn't actually changed the fundamental dynamic between us. She was still the woman who had looked at me with contempt and declared my appearance disgusting. Marcus was still the son who had failed to defend me when I needed him most. The foundation was real, and it would do genuine good for women who faced age discrimination. But if I was being honest with myself, I had also created it as a weapon, a way to humiliate Vanessa and force Marcus to see me differently. Now I had to decide what to do with the power I had revealed. Over the next few days, the response to the foundation announcement was overwhelming. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the Late Bloomers Foundation, complete with a photograph of me at the podium and quotes from several women who had already applied for grants. Thomas Whitmore called to tell me that his office had been flooded with inquiries from potential donors and partnership organizations. "Margaret," he said during our phone call, "you've touched on something that resonates with a lot of people. The foundation website has received over 10,000 visitors in 3 days, and the application portal has been accessed nearly 500 times. I was pleased by the response, but also somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden attention. I'm glad people are interested, Thomas, but I want to make sure we maintain our focus. This isn't about publicity for me. It's about creating real opportunities for women who need them." Absolutely. I've taken the liberty of reaching out to some other foundations that focus on women's issues. There's significant interest in collaborating with you on programming and resource sharing. As word spread about the foundation, I began receiving calls and visits from friends and acquaintances I hadn't heard from in months. Some were genuinely excited about the cause and wanted to volunteer or donate. Others seemed more interested in gossip about my revealed wealth and the dramatic way I had announced it. Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor for 15 years, knocked on my door the day after the chamber dinner with a casserole and barely concealed curiosity. "Margaret, I had no idea you were so well off," she said the moment I invited her in. "Harold must have been quite the investor. He was very careful with money." I replied diplomatically, not wanting to get into details about our financial history with someone who would undoubtedly share everything with the neighborhood association. "And that speech at the dinner, about someone calling your wrinkles disgusting. Who would say such a terrible thing?" Her eyes were bright with anticipation, clearly hoping for juicy details she could relay to her circle of friends. "Someone who doesn't understand that a person's worth isn't determined by their appearance," I said, steering the conversation away from specifics. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't easily deterred. "Was it that girlfriend of Marcus's? I never liked her attitude when I've seen her around the neighborhood. Very superior, if you ask me." I accepted the casserole and thanked her for her concern, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to provide ammunition for neighborhood gossip. After she left, I realized that my public revelation had opened up aspects of my private life that I wasn't prepared to discuss with casual acquaintances. 3 days after the chamber dinner, Marcus called to ask if he could come over alone. "Vanessa has a work commitment," he explained, though I suspected she was simply too embarrassed to face me after my public response to her cruelty. When he arrived that evening, he looked tired and stressed, in a way that reminded me of the difficult periods during his teenage years when he was struggling with important decisions. We sat in the living room where this whole situation had begun, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Mom," he finally said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the dinner, about how I handled the situation with Vanessa. And what conclusions have you reached? I think I was so focused on trying to keep everyone happy that I didn't protect you the way I should have." He leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together. I was caught off guard by how nasty she got, and instead of shutting it down immediately, I tried to find a middle ground where somehow everyone could be okay. I appreciated his acknowledgement, but I needed to understand his motivations more clearly. "Marcus, when someone attacks your mother in her own home, there shouldn't be any middle ground. The only appropriate response is to defend her and remove the attacker from the situation." "You're right. I know you're right. I guess I was hoping that if I could just get through the moment, somehow we could all move past it and things could go back to normal." But that's the problem, sweetheart. Things weren't normal before Vanessa's outburst. She had been treating me with subtle contempt for months, and you had been ignoring it because it was easier than confronting her about it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the truth of what I was saying. "Maybe I did notice that she wasn't always warm toward you. But I thought that was just her personality. She's not comfortable with family dynamics because her own family situation was complicated growing up." Many people have complicated family backgrounds, Marcus. That doesn't give them license to be cruel to other people's families. I studied his face, trying to understand how my kind, intelligent son had become someone who made excuses for such behavior. Did you ever consider that her discomfort with family dynamics might make her unsuitable as a long-term partner for someone whose family relationships are important to him? I love her, Mom. I know she has flaws, but everyone does. I thought maybe with time she would warm up to you and things would get better. She didn't just fail to warm up to me, Marcus. She systematically attacked my appearance, my lifestyle, my relevance as a person, and my relationship with you. Those weren't the actions of someone who was slowly adjusting to family dynamics. Those were the actions of someone who fundamentally doesn't respect me or value my place in your life. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd had since childhood when he was feeling overwhelmed. I know what she said was wrong. I've told her that. She feels terrible about it. Does she feel terrible about saying it? Or does she feel terrible about the consequences of saying it? I asked. Because there's a significant difference between remorse and regret. Marcus looked puzzled by the distinction, so I continued. Remorse is what you feel when you realize you've hurt someone you care about and you want to make it right, because their pain matters to you. Regret is what you feel when your actions have consequences that negatively impact your own life. I think she genuinely feels bad about hurting you. Marcus, after her visit here earlier this week, I'm not convinced she understands that she hurt me at all. She seems to think the problem was the way she expressed her opinions about my appearance, not the opinions themselves. He was quiet for several minutes, and I could see him thinking through our conversation and probably replaying Vanessa's various attempts at apology. Finally, he looked up at me with something like recognition in his eyes. She did focus a lot on how she said things rather than what she actually said, he admitted slowly. Even when she talked about apologizing to you, it was about finding better ways to express her concerns about your lifestyle and appearance. Exactly. She still believes I'm someone who needs to be fixed or improved to be acceptable. The foundation announcement didn't change her fundamental assessment of me. It just made her realize that publicly insulting me might have social and financial consequences she hadn't anticipated. Marcus stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, examining the family photographs that Vanessa had looked at with such disdain. I keep trying to imagine Dad in this situation. What would he have done if someone had spoken to you the way Vanessa spoke to you? Your father would have asked her to leave immediately, and he would have made it clear that she was not welcome in our home again unless she could demonstrate genuine respect for both of us. I smiled at the memory of Richard's quiet but unwavering protectiveness. He would never have tried to find a middle ground between his wife's dignity and someone else's cruelty. I failed you, didn't I? Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. You made a choice that prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting your mother. Whether that constitutes failure depends on what kind of man you want to be going forward. He turned back to face me. What do you mean? I mean that this situation has revealed something about your character that you probably don't like seeing. The question now is whether you're going to make changes based on what you've learned, or whether you're going to rationalize your behavior and continue down the same path. What kind of changes are you talking about? I considered my words carefully because I knew this was a pivotal moment in our relationship. Marcus, I need you to understand something. I have spent the last 3 years trying to rebuild my life after your father's death. I thought part of that rebuilding involved maintaining a close relationship with my only child, even if it meant accepting less respect and consideration than I deserved. Mom, I do respect you. Do you? Because respect isn't just a feeling, Marcus, it's a pattern of behavior. It's defending someone when they're attacked. It's prioritizing their well-being over your own convenience. It's refusing to allow other people to treat them poorly in your presence. He sat back down, looking deflated. So what happens now? Are you cutting me out of your life because I didn't handle one situation perfectly? This wasn't one situation, sweetheart. This was the culmination of months of you allowing your girlfriend to treat me as an inconvenience and an embarrassment. The cruel things she said to me that day were just the most explicit expression of an attitude she's been displaying all along. But I can fix this, Mom. I can talk to Vanessa, set clearer boundaries, make sure she understands how important you are to me. I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be kind and strong, and I felt a deep sadness at how far he had drifted from those values. Marcus, the problem isn't that Vanessa doesn't understand how important I am to you. The problem is that she doesn't believe I deserve basic human decency, regardless of my importance to anyone else. Maybe she can learn. Maybe she can. But that's not really the issue anymore, is it? The issue is that you stood by and watched while someone demonstrated a complete lack of respect for your mother, and you didn't find that behavior unacceptable enough to address immediately and definitively. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Are you saying you don't want me in your life anymore? I'm saying that I deserve better than what I've been accepting from both of you. I'm 68 years old, Marcus. I don't have unlimited time to spend in relationships that make me feel diminished and unwanted. But you're my mother. We're family. Family is supposed to be the place where you're loved and protected, not where you're expected to accept mistreatment in the name of keeping peace. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Richard and I had planted together. I raised you to be a good man, Marcus. A man who stands up for what's right, who protects people who can't protect themselves, who values character over convenience. I am a good man, Mom. One mistake doesn't define my entire character. It wasn't one mistake. It was a series of choices that revealed your priorities. And right now, those priorities don't include your mother's well-being and dignity. The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus alternating between defensive explanations and genuine attempts to understand my perspective. By the time he left, we hadn't resolved anything definitively, but I could see that he was finally grappling with some uncomfortable truths about his behavior and his relationship choices. Over the next week, I threw myself into the work of establishing the Late Bloomers Foundation. Thomas had assembled a team of lawyers and administrators to help manage the influx of applications and inquiries, and I spent several hours each day reviewing proposals and meeting with potential grant recipients. One of the most moving applications came from a 58-year-old woman named Carol, who had been laid off from her corporate job and told she was overqualified for every position she applied for afterward. She wanted to start a consulting business helping other displaced older workers navigate career transitions, but she needed funding for certification programs and office setup. Mrs. Sinclair, Carol said during our meeting, I can't tell you what it means to have someone recognize that women our age still have valuable contributions to make. After 6 months of being told I'm too old to be useful, I was starting to believe it myself. Her story reminded me of the underlying purpose behind the foundation, beyond my personal desire to make a statement about Vanessa's cruelty. There were hundreds of women facing age discrimination, being dismissed and undervalued, simply because they had lived long enough to accumulate some wrinkles and gray hair. I approved Carol's grant immediately and asked her to stay in touch about the development of her business. I want to feature your story in our first annual report, I told her. Other women need to see examples of reinvention and success. As the foundation gained momentum, I found myself energized in ways I hadn't experienced since Richard's death. Having a meaningful project that utilized my organizational skills and financial resources gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing from my quiet retirement lifestyle. But the satisfaction of the foundation work was complicated by the ongoing tension with Marcus and Vanessa. Marcus had called several times, each conversation following a similar pattern. He would acknowledge that Vanessa's behavior had been unacceptable, promise to address it more directly, and then ask what he could do to repair our relationship. The problem was that he continued to frame the issue as a conflict between two people who both had valid points, rather than recognizing it as a situation where one person had been cruel and the other had been victimized. He seemed unable or unwilling to accept that Vanessa's behavior was fundamentally wrong, not just poorly expressed. 2 weeks after the chamber dinner, Vanessa surprised me by showing up at my house again, this time without Marcus. She looked different than she had during her previous visits, less polished, more uncertain. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. Margaret, I hope you don't mind me coming by without calling first, she said when I opened the door. I know things have been tense between us, and I thought maybe we could talk honestly about what's been happening. I was curious about what she wanted to say, so I invited her in. We sat in the living room again, and I noticed that she seemed to be seeing the space differently than she had before. Instead of scanning the room with obvious disdain, she was looking around with something that might have been respect or at least awareness. I want to start by acknowledging that I completely misjudged you, she began. When I made those comments about your appearance and your lifestyle, I had no idea about your accomplishments or your resources. And if you had known about my accomplishments and resources, would your comments have been any less cruel? She paused, clearly having prepared for a different conversation. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I realize now that I was wrong about who you are. Vanessa, the issue isn't that you were wrong about my bank account balance. The issue is that you thought it was acceptable to speak to another human being the way you spoke to me, regardless of their financial status or social position. I know. I was completely out of line. I was stressed about work, and I took it out on you unfairly. You weren't just unfairly critical, Vanessa. You were deliberately cruel. You told me my wrinkles were disgusting. You suggested that Marcus was embarrassed to be seen with me. You recommended cosmetic surgery to make me more acceptable in your social circles. I kept my voice level, but I wanted her to hear the specific words she had used. Those weren't comments made in a moment of stress. Those were calculated attacks designed to make me feel worthless. Vanessa looked down at her hands, and for a moment I thought I might be reaching her. But then she looked back up with that familiar defensive expression. I admit I expressed myself poorly. But Margaret, you have to understand that I care about Marcus. I want him to be proud of his family, and sometimes that means having honest conversations about how we present ourselves. There it was again. She still believed that the problem was how she had expressed her concerns, not the concerns themselves. She still thought that my appearance and lifestyle were legitimate issues that needed to be addressed. Vanessa, I said quietly, do you think Marcus should be ashamed of me? No, of course not. But I think we all have room for improvement. What improvements do you think I need to make to be acceptable as Marcus's mother? She shifted uncomfortably. I just think that when we love someone, we want to put our best foot forward for them. We want to look our best, dress nicely, stay current with trends. And you think I haven't been doing that? Well, you have to admit that your style is very dated, and you could benefit from some professional skincare treatments, maybe some color in your hair. I stared at her in amazement. Even after the foundation announcement, even after seeing me celebrated by hundreds of community leaders, even after learning that I had significant wealth and social standing, she still believed that my appearance needed to be modified to meet her standards. Vanessa, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you believe that I, as a 68-year-old woman, have the right to look my age? Of course you have the right to look however you want, but no buts. Do you believe that I have the right to have gray hair, wrinkles, and age-appropriate clothing without being considered an embarrassment to my son? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with the question. Finally, she said, I think we all have an obligation to the people we love to present ourselves in the best possible light. And what if my best possible light includes wrinkles and gray hair? What if my best possible self is someone who values comfort over fashion, substance over appearance? I just think there are ways to age gracefully that don't require giving up on looking attractive. To whom do I need to look attractive, Vanessa? I'm a widow, I'm not dating. I'm not seeking professional advancement. I'm living my life according to my own values and priorities. Why is that not acceptable to you? Because it affects Marcus. People judge us by our families. What kind of people judge someone by their mother's appearance? And more importantly, why would you want Marcus to associate with people who think that way? Vanessa was growing visibly frustrated with my questions. Look, I know you think I'm shallow, but I live in a competitive world where image matters. Marcus's career depends partly on social connections and professional relationships. Having family who look successful and current can open doors. And you think my appearance closes doors for him? I think it doesn't help. I stood up, feeling a familiar surge of anger and disappointment. Vanessa, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. I am not a marketing tool for my son's career. I am not a prop in your social ambitions. I am a human being with intrinsic worth that has nothing to do with my usefulness to other people. I never said you were just a prop. You have consistently treated me like a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome. You have never once shown any interest in who I am as a person, what I've accomplished in my life, what I think or feel or value. That's not true. I've tried to get to know you. When? When have you ever asked me about my career, my interests, my experiences? When have you ever shown curiosity about my relationship with Richard? My work at the university? My friendships? My hobbies? I was becoming more animated now, letting months of frustration show. You've been dating my son for 6 months, and you know nothing about me except that you find my appearance offensive. Vanessa stood up as well, her own anger finally showing. Fine, maybe I haven't been the perfect future daughter-in-law, but you haven't exactly made an effort to connect with me either. You've been polite but distant from the beginning. I have been polite because that's how civilized people behave. But you're right that I've been distant. Do you know why? Because you don't approve of me. Because I sensed that you didn't like me, and I didn't want to subject myself to more rejection than necessary. I could see in your eyes every time you looked at me that you found me lacking. I could hear the condescension in your voice when you spoke to me. I knew you were just counting the minutes until you could leave my presence. That's not how I felt, isn't it? Then why did you feel the need to tell me my wrinkles were disgusting? Why did you suggest cosmetic surgery? Why? Did you imply that Marcus was embarrassed by me? I was speaking more forcefully now, letting her see the full impact of her cruelty. Those comments didn't come from nowhere, Vanessa. They came from months of you looking at me with disgust and finally deciding to voice your true feelings. She was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe finally she was beginning to understand the damage she had done. But then she said, I think we're both too emotional to have a productive conversation right now. Maybe we should take some time to cool down and try again later. I realized in that moment that she was never going to understand. She was never going to acknowledge the full extent of her cruelty or take genuine responsibility for the pain she had caused. She would continue to frame this as a misunderstanding between two people who had different communication styles, rather than recognizing it as an instance of deliberate psychological violence. Vanessa, I said quietly, I don't think there's going to be a later. I think we've both said everything we need to say. What do you mean? I mean that this conversation has confirmed what I suspected after your last visit. You don't actually believe you did anything wrong. You think the problem is that I'm too sensitive, too emotional, too unwilling to accept constructive criticism about my appearance. I think we had a miscommunication that got blown out of proportion. You told me I was disgusting. That's not a miscommunication, that's a deliberate attack. I was frustrated and I spoke without thinking. No, Vanessa, you spoke exactly what you were thinking. The problem is that what you were thinking was cruel and unacceptable. I walked to the front door, making it clear that the conversation was over. I think it's time for you to leave. And I think it's time for both of us to accept that we're never going to have a functional relationship. She followed me to the door, looking more confused than angry. Margaret, I came here because I want to fix things between us. For Marcus's sake, if nothing else. Marcus deserves better than both of us pretending to get along for his benefit. He deserves a mother who won't accept being treated poorly, and he deserves a girlfriend who can show basic respect for the people he loves. You're really going to let this destroy his happiness? The question was so breathtakingly selfish that I almost laughed. I'm not destroying anything, Vanessa. I'm simply refusing to pretend that your behavior was acceptable. If that destroys Marcus's happiness, then his happiness was built on a foundation that needed to be destroyed. After she left, I sat in my living room and thought about the conversation we'd just had. Part of me had hoped that she would surprise me, that she would demonstrate some capacity for genuine self-reflection and growth. Instead, she had confirmed my worst fears about her character and her ability to change. That evening, Marcus called to ask how the conversation with Vanessa had gone. She said, "You two talked, but she seemed upset when she got back. Did something happen?" We had an honest conversation about her behavior and her attitudes. She's upset because I didn't accept her version of events or agree to pretend that her cruelty was just a miscommunication. Mom, she really is trying to make things right. Can't you meet her halfway? Marcus, there is no halfway between dignity and humiliation. There is no compromise between respect and contempt. I was tired of having the same conversation over and over. Your girlfriend believes that I'm an embarrassment, who needs to be improved to be acceptable in your life. I believe that I deserve basic human respect regardless of my appearance or usefulness to other people. Those positions are incompatible. But if you both just tried a little harder to understand each other's perspective, I understand her perspective perfectly. She thinks I'm old, unattractive, and irrelevant. She thinks Marcus would be better off if I were younger, prettier, and more fashionable. She thinks my value as a person is determined by how well I serve his social and professional ambitions. I paused, letting that sink in. Do you understand my perspective, Marcus? I think you're both being stubborn. That's not an answer to my question. Do you understand why I find her attitude unacceptable? He was quiet for a long moment. I guess I understand that her comments hurt your feelings. Marcus, this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about fundamental human dignity. Your girlfriend doesn't believe I deserve to be treated with respect. That's not a hurt feeling. That's an assault on my basic worth as a person. Maybe she does believe you deserve respect, but she expresses it differently than you do. How does telling someone their wrinkles are disgusting express respect? I don't think that's what she meant. That's exactly what she said, Marcus. In those exact words. I have witnesses if you need them. Okay, maybe she said that, but I don't think she meant it the way you took it. I realized that we had reached an impasse. Marcus was so invested in his relationship with Vanessa that he was willing to rewrite reality rather than confront the truth about her character. He would continue to make excuses and suggest compromises and blame me for being too sensitive, because acknowledging the full extent of her cruelty would require him to make choices he wasn't prepared to make. Marcus, I said finally, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. I love you more than anything in this world. You are my greatest accomplishment and my deepest joy, but I will not allow anyone, including you, to convince me that I deserve to be treated poorly. Mom, nobody thinks you deserve to be treated poorly. Your girlfriend does. And you're asking me to accept her treatment because it's convenient for your relationship. That's not love, Marcus. That's asking me to sacrifice my dignity for your comfort. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. I'm asking you to give her another chance. I gave her a chance today. She came to my house, and I listened to everything she had to say. She still believes that I need to be improved to be acceptable. She still thinks my appearance is a problem that needs to be solved. She still has no understanding of why her words were cruel or what kind of damage they did. Maybe she just needs more time to understand. How much time, Marcus? How long should I wait for her to develop basic human empathy? How many more cruel comments should I accept while she learns how to treat people decently? I don't know, Mom. I just know that I love her, and I love you, and I want to find a way to make this work. Some things can't be made to work, sweetheart. Some people are fundamentally incompatible. Some relationships are too damaged to repair. I felt tears starting to form, grieving for the future I had imagined with my son. And some choices reveal who we really are, in ways that can't be undone. What's that supposed to mean? It means that you've chosen to prioritize your girlfriend's comfort over your mother's dignity. You've chosen to make excuses for cruelty rather than demanding better behavior. You've chosen to ask me to accept mistreatment rather than requiring the person you love to show basic respect for the person who raised you. That's not fair, Mom. That's not what I'm choosing. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what you're choosing. The conversation ended with both of us frustrated and hurt, no closer to resolution than we had been weeks earlier. I went to bed that night feeling more alone than I had since Richard's death, but also strangely resolved. I had drawn my lines clearly. I had stated my position unambiguously. Whatever happened next would be Marcus's choice. The next morning brought unexpected news that would change the trajectory of everything. Thomas Whitmore called to tell me that the Late Bloomers Foundation had received a call from a major television network that produced human interest documentaries. Margaret, they want to do a feature story about the foundation and the issues it addresses, Thomas explained. Apparently, word has spread beyond our local community about your speech at the chamber dinner and the work you're doing with older women facing discrimination. I was intrigued but cautious. What kind of feature story? a 30-minute documentary segment about ageism in America, with your foundation as the central example of how to combat it effectively. They want to interview you, some of the grant recipients, and experts in workplace discrimination. That seems like good publicity for the cause. It would be excellent publicity. National exposure could help you raise additional funds and inspire similar initiatives in other communities. Thomas paused. But Margaret, they also want to include the personal story that inspired you to create the foundation. The producer I spoke with specifically asked about the circumstances that led to your decision to establish the Late Bloomers Foundation. I understood immediately what he was implying. They want to know about Vanessa's comments. They think the personal element would make the story more compelling to viewers. The idea that you transformed a cruel personal attack into a force for positive change. I thought about Marcus and Vanessa, both of whom were already dealing with the local fallout from my chamber dinner speech. National television coverage would exponentially increase their embarrassment and social consequences. Thomas, I need to think about this carefully. Agreeing to this interview could have significant impact on my family relationships. Of course, take all the time you need to decide. But Margaret, I think you should know that several of the women you've helped through the foundation have specifically asked to participate if you decide to do the story. They want to talk about how your example inspired them to fight back against age discrimination in their own lives. After hanging up with Thomas, I spent the morning walking through my neighborhood, thinking about the choice I was facing. Participating in the documentary would give national attention to an important cause and potentially help thousands of women facing similar discrimination. But it would also publicly humiliate Marcus and Vanessa in ways that might permanently damage our family relationships. As I walked past the small park where I had pushed Marcus on swings 30 years earlier, I realized that I was looking at this decision through the wrong lens. The question wasn't whether I should protect Marcus and Vanessa from the consequences of their behavior. The question was whether I should use my platform to help other women who were facing the same kind of treatment I had endured. I thought about Carol, the displaced corporate executive who was building a consulting business. I thought about the dozens of other applications I had reviewed from women who had been told they were too old, too outdated, too irrelevant to matter. I thought about how many more women might be helped if the foundation's work reached a national audience. By the time I returned home, I had made my decision. I called Thomas and told him to schedule the interview. Are you sure about this, Margaret? Once this airs, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. But Thomas, I want to make sure the focus stays on the women we're helping and the broader issues of age discrimination. This isn't about personal revenge. It's about social change. Understood. I'll make that clear to the producers. That evening, I called Marcus to tell him about the television opportunity. I felt I owed him advance warning about what was coming, even if I was moving forward regardless of his feelings about it. A documentary? About the foundation? His voice was strained. About ageism and workplace discrimination, with the foundation as an example of effective intervention. It would air nationally and could help us reach many more women who need support. Mom, you know they're going to ask about what inspired you to start the foundation. Yes, they've already asked about the personal circumstances that led to its creation. And you're going to tell them about Vanessa's comments. I'm going to tell them about experiencing age-related discrimination and deciding to fight back against it. The specific details will depend on what questions they ask. Mom, please. This will humiliate us both. Everyone will know what happened. It could affect my business, my reputation, everything I've worked for. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, but I also recognized the familiar pattern of his prioritizing his own comfort over addressing the underlying issues. Marcus, I understand that this situation is difficult for you, but have you considered that it might also affect the reputation and livelihood of hundreds of women who are being discriminated against because of their age? That's different, Mom. Those are strangers. This is your family. And families should protect each other, shouldn't they? Families should defend each other when they're attacked. Families should refuse to allow outsiders to treat their loved ones cruelly. I kept my voice gentle, but I wanted him to hear the parallel I was drawing. Where was that family loyalty when I needed it? I've already admitted I handled that situation poorly. But destroying my career and embarrassing Vanessa publicly isn't going to fix what happened. I'm not trying to destroy anything, Marcus. I'm trying to build something positive out of a negative experience. If you and Vanessa are embarrassed by the national exposure of her behavior, perhaps that embarrassment might motivate some self-reflection. She's already reflected, Mom. She knows she was wrong. She's tried to apologize multiple times. Has she, though? Because when she came to see me this week, she still believed that my appearance needed to be improved. She still thought the problem was how she expressed her concerns, not the concerns themselves. There was a long pause. Maybe she needs more time. Marcus, I've given this situation months of my life. I've tried to understand, to compromise, to find common ground. I've been patient with both of you far longer than the situation deserved. At some point, patience becomes enabling. So you're just going to go on national television and humiliate us? I'm going to go on national television and talk about the importance of treating older women with dignity and respect. I'm going to discuss how age discrimination affects real people's lives and livelihoods. I'm going to highlight the work the Foundation is doing to combat these problems. I paused, choosing my words carefully. If that story happens to include examples of the kind of treatment that inspired the Foundation's creation, then those examples serve an educational purpose. Mom, please. I'm begging you not to do this. There has to be another way to promote the Foundation without airing our personal business on national television. There probably is another way, Marcus. But this is the way that's been offered to me, and this is the way that will reach the most people and potentially help the most women. What about helping your own son? The question hung between us, and I realized we had reached the heart of the matter. Marcus wanted me to sacrifice an opportunity to advance an important cause in order to protect him from the social consequences of his girlfriend's behavior and his own failure to address it. What kind of help are you asking for exactly? I asked. Are you asking me to pretend that Vanessa's cruelty was acceptable? Are you asking me to hide the fact that age discrimination happens even within families? Are you asking me to prioritize your reputation over the well-being of women who are facing similar treatment? I'm asking you to consider the impact this will have on people you supposedly love. And I'm asking you to consider the impact your girlfriend's behavior has already had on someone you supposedly love. I could hear the edge creeping into my voice. You're asking me to protect you from embarrassment while refusing to acknowledge that you failed to protect me from deliberate cruelty. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? You're asking me to sacrifice something important to me in order to spare you discomfort. That's exactly what you asked me to do when Vanessa was attacking me. You wanted me to accept her treatment quietly, so that you could avoid the discomfort of confronting her about it. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, and I could almost hear him thinking through the parallel I had drawn. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller, more uncertain. I never thought of it that way. I know you didn't, and that's part of the problem. You've been so focused on managing situations and keeping everyone comfortable that you've lost sight of what's actually right and wrong. So what happens now? You do the interview, we all get nationally embarrassed, and then what? Then we all live with the consequences of our choices. You'll live with the consequences of failing to protect your mother when she needed you. Vanessa will live with the consequences of her cruelty towards someone who never did anything to deserve it. And I'll live with the consequences of refusing to be silenced when I have an opportunity to help other women who are facing similar treatment. And our relationship? What happens to us? The question broke my heart because I could hear the little boy in his voice, the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I could fix anything. I don't know, sweetheart. That depends partly on what you learn from this experience. What do you mean? I mean that this situation has revealed some things about your character that concern me. Your willingness to prioritize your romantic relationship over your family obligations. Your tendency to avoid difficult conversations, even when avoiding them, causes harm to people you're supposed to love. Your ability to rationalize unacceptable behavior when confronting it would be inconvenient for you. You make it sound like I'm a terrible person. You're not a terrible person, Marcus. You're a person who has made some terrible choices. The question is whether you're capable of learning from those choices and making better ones in the future. And if I am, if I learn and change and do better, Then maybe we can rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I will never again accept being treated poorly in the name of family harmony. I will never again pretend that cruelty is acceptable as long as it's wrapped in apologies and excuses. I understand. Do you? Because understanding isn't just intellectual comprehension. It's emotional acceptance and behavioral change. If you truly understand what I'm saying, then you'll stop making excuses for Vanessa's behavior. You'll stop asking me to compromise my dignity for your convenience. You'll start prioritizing what's right over what's easy. After we hung up, I spent the evening preparing for the television interview. The producers had sent me a list of potential questions, and I worked on articulating my thoughts clearly and persuasively. I wanted to make sure that the focus remained on the broader issues of age discrimination, while still being honest about the personal experiences that had motivated my activism. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Vanessa's mother, Diana, a woman I had met only once before, briefly, at a restaurant where we had encountered each other while having separate lunches with our respective children. She was an elegant woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed and professionally styled in a way that reminded me of Vanessa's approach to personal presentation. "Mrs. Sinclair," she said when I opened the door, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I heard about the television interview you're planning, and I wondered if we could speak privately about the situation between you and Vanessa." I was curious about her perspective, so I invited her in and offered coffee. As we settled in the living room, I studied her face, looking for signs of her daughter's character traits. "I want to start by saying that I'm deeply embarrassed by my daughter's behavior toward you," Diana began. "When Marcus told me what Vanessa had said about your appearance, I was horrified. That kind of cruelty is not how I raised her, and it's not reflective of our family's values." Her directness surprised me. "I appreciate you saying that. Vanessa has always struggled with tact and diplomacy. Even as a child, she had a tendency to say exactly what she was thinking without considering how her words might affect other people. We worked with counselors and tried to help her develop better social skills, but some patterns are very difficult to change. With respect, Diana, what your daughter said to me wasn't a lack of tact. It was deliberate cruelty. There's a difference between being socially awkward and being intentionally hurtful." Diana nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. I've been trying to find ways to excuse her behavior, because she's my daughter and I love her. But loving someone doesn't mean pretending their actions are acceptable when they're clearly not. Has Vanessa told you her version of what happened?" "She has. And she's also told me about your subsequent conversations and the foundation announcement. She's extremely distressed about the possibility of national television coverage. I imagine she is. Mrs. Sinclair, I'm not here to ask you to cancel the interview. I understand that you have important work to do, and that work shouldn't be sacrificed to protect my daughter from the consequences of her choices." Diana leaned forward slightly. "But I am here to ask if there might be a way to tell your story without specifically identifying Vanessa as the person who made those cruel comments." I considered her request. Why does the identification matter? If Vanessa truly understands that her behavior was wrong and feels genuine remorse about it, wouldn't she want other people to learn from her mistake? She's afraid it will destroy her career. She works in a field where reputation and professional relationships are crucial. If potential clients or colleagues see her identified as someone who makes cruel comments about older women, it could permanently damage her prospects. Diana, have you considered that there might be women in Vanessa's workplace who are facing age discrimination? Women who might benefit from seeing that there are consequences for the kind of behavior your daughter displayed? I have considered that. And you're right that accountability is important. But I also know that Vanessa is genuinely trying to learn from this experience. She's been seeing a therapist to work on her communication skills and her tendency toward judgmental thinking. This was the first I had heard about therapy, and I was mildly encouraged by the information. That's good to hear. What has she learned so far? She's beginning to understand that her comments weren't just poorly expressed opinions, but actual attacks on your dignity and self-worth. She's also starting to recognize that her tendency to judge people by their appearance and lifestyle choices is a character flaw that needs to be addressed. Those are important realizations. But Diana, understanding that you've done something wrong and taking responsibility for it are two different things. Has Vanessa taken any concrete steps to make amends beyond attending therapy sessions? What kind of steps do you mean? Has she donated to organizations that support older women? Has she volunteered with groups that combat age discrimination? Has she spoken to other people about the importance of treating older adults with respect? Has she done anything to turn her mistake into positive action? Diana was quiet for a moment. I don't think she's done any of those things, but she has been more conscious about her interactions with older people in her daily life. That's a start, I suppose, but it's a fairly minimal response to the kind of damage she did. What would you consider an adequate response? I thought about the question carefully. Diana, your daughter didn't just hurt my feelings, she attacked my fundamental worth as a human being. She suggested that my son should be ashamed of me. She recommended cosmetic surgery to make me more acceptable. That kind of cruelty doesn't get balanced out by simply being more polite to older people going forward. Then what would balance it out? A genuine commitment to fighting the kind of ageism she demonstrated. Active involvement in organizations that support older women. Financial contributions to causes that combat age discrimination. Public acknowledgement of her behavior and its harmful effects, not to humiliate herself, but to educate other people about the impact of these attitudes. You're talking about a significant lifestyle change. Yes, I am. Because what she did wasn't a minor social mistake. It was a serious act of cruelty that caused real damage and reflected deeply problematic attitudes about aging and human worth. Diana was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing what I had said. Mrs. Sinclair, can I ask you something? If Vanessa were to make those kinds of changes, if she were to become genuinely committed to fighting ageism and supporting older women, would you consider not identifying her specifically in the television interview? I might consider it. But Diana, I would need to see evidence of genuine change, not just promises or good intentions. And I would need to see that change sustained over time, not just temporary adjustments motivated by fear of public embarrassment. How much time are we talking about? The interview is scheduled for next week. So we're not talking about a long period of observation. Then what kind of evidence could realistically be provided in that time frame? I thought about the question. Concrete actions. Financial donations to relevant organizations. Signed commitments to volunteer work. Written statements acknowledging the harm caused by age discrimination and her role in perpetuating it. Tangible steps that go beyond therapy sessions and good intentions. I understand. I'll discuss this with Vanessa and see if she's willing to make those commitments. Deanna, I need to be clear about something. I'm not making these suggestions because I want to give Vanessa a way to avoid consequences. I'm making them because I believe that people who cause harm have an obligation to actively work to repair that harm. If she's truly committed to change, then demonstrating that commitment publicly might actually enhance her reputation rather than damage it. What do you mean? Think about it from the perspective of potential clients or colleagues. Would you rather work with someone who made a mistake and then hid from the consequences? Or someone who made a mistake and then took meaningful action to address the underlying problems that led to that mistake? Diana nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting way to look at it. Turn the mistake into evidence of character growth rather than character deficiency. Exactly. But only if the growth is genuine and sustained. Empty gestures and superficial changes won't accomplish that transformation. After Diana left, I spent the afternoon thinking about our conversation. I was genuinely curious to see whether Vanessa would be willing to make the kind of commitments we had discussed. Part of me hoped she would surprise me with a display of moral courage and genuine remorse. But part of me suspected that she would choose the path of least resistance, trying to minimize her exposure without truly addressing her problematic attitudes. 2 days later, I received a call from Marcus asking if he could come over with Vanessa. She wants to talk to you about some ideas she's had for making amends, he said. Would you be willing to listen? Of course I'll listen. But Marcus, I want you to understand that I'm not looking for gestures or performances. If Vanessa wants to demonstrate genuine change, it needs to be substantive and sustained. I think you'll be impressed by what she's prepared. When they arrived that evening, Vanessa looked different again. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater, with minimal makeup and her hair pulled back in a casual style. She carried a folder, full of papers, and seemed nervous in a way I hadn't seen before. "Margaret," she began as we settled in the living room, "I want to start by saying that I've spent the last few weeks really thinking about what I said to you and why I said it. I've been working with a therapist, and I've come to understand that my comments weren't just rude or thoughtless. They were actually a form of discrimination based on age and appearance. I was encouraged by her use of the word discrimination, rather than misunderstanding or miscommunication. I've also come to realize," she continued, "that my attitudes toward aging and older women were deeply problematic and hurtful. I was judging people based on superficial characteristics rather than their actual worth and contributions. Those are important realizations, Vanessa. What do you plan to do with those insights?" She opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "I've made some commitments that I want to share with you. First, I've made a $10,000 donation to the Late Bloomers Foundation in your name. I know that doesn't undo the harm I caused, but I want to support the work you're doing." I was surprised by the size of the donation, which represented a significant financial commitment for someone at her career level. That's very generous. I've also signed up to volunteer with the Senior Services Center downtown, helping older adults with job search skills and interview preparation. I commit to at least 4 hours per week for the next year. That's a meaningful commitment. And I've written a letter of apology that I'd like to share with you. Not just apologizing for my words, but acknowledging the deeper attitudes that led to those words and committing to ongoing work to change those attitudes. She handed me a handwritten letter, several pages long. As I read it, I was struck by the thoughtfulness of her language and the specificity of her acknowledgments. She didn't just say that she had been wrong. She articulated exactly what had been wrong about her thinking and behavior. She didn't just promise to do better. She outlined concrete steps she would take to ensure that improvement. "This letter shows a level of understanding that I haven't seen from you before," I told her. "It gives me hope that your commitment to change is genuine." "It is genuine, Margaret. I want you to know that even if you decide to proceed with the television interview and identify me specifically, I understand that those consequences are the result of my own choices. I'm not asking you to protect me from accountability. Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking for the opportunity to be part of the solution rather than just an example of the problem. If you're willing to give me that opportunity, I'd like to work with the foundation and contribute to the fight against age discrimination." Marcus had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Mom, I know I haven't handled this situation well from the beginning. I've been more focused on avoiding conflict than on doing what was right. I want to change that." "What kind of change are you talking about?" "I want to support the foundation's work too. I want to use my professional network to raise awareness about age discrimination in the workplace. And I want to make sure that I never again prioritize my own comfort over defending the people I love." I looked at both of them, trying to assess the genuineness of their commitments. Vanessa's letter and concrete actions suggested a level of self-reflection that I hadn't seen before. Marcus's acknowledgement of his failures was more direct and specific than his previous apologies. "These are encouraging developments," I said carefully. "But I need you both to understand that meaningful change takes time to demonstrate. Good intentions and initial actions are important, but sustained commitment is what actually matters." "We understand," Vanessa said. "And we're prepared for that long-term commitment regardless of what you decide about the television interview." "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about the interview, and I've realized that there might be a more powerful way to tell this story." They both looked at me expectantly. "Instead of focusing on the personal conflict that inspired the foundation, what if we focused on the transformation that resulted from it? What if the story became about how a painful experience led to positive change for everyone involved?" "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean that if you're both truly committed to becoming advocates for age equality and respect for older adults, then maybe the more important story is about how people can learn from their mistakes and become forces for positive change. Vanessa leaned forward. Are you saying you'd be willing to present this as a story of growth and redemption rather than just consequences and accountability? I'm saying that accountability and redemption aren't mutually exclusive. True accountability requires acknowledgement, amends, and ongoing action to address the harm that was caused. If you're both willing to demonstrate that kind of accountability publicly, then the story becomes about the possibility of change rather than just the reality of cruelty. What would that look like practically? Marcus asked. It would look like both of you participating in the interview, acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility for your roles in it, and discussing the concrete steps you're taking to ensure that similar harm doesn't happen again. It would mean being willing to be vulnerable and honest about your mistakes in service of helping other people avoid making similar ones. They looked at each other, and I could see them communicating silently about the risks and benefits of such an approach. That would be much more exposing than just having the story told without our participation. Vanessa said slowly. Yes, it would be. But it would also be much more powerful. Instead of being passive subjects in a story about cruelty and consequences, you would be active participants in a story about growth and change. And you would be willing to frame it that way? As a story of transformation, rather than just justice? If the transformation is genuine, then yes. But Vanessa, I need to be clear about something. If you participate in this interview, you'll be making a public commitment to continued work on these issues. You'll be accountable not just to me, but to everyone who sees the program. That's a significant responsibility. I understand. And I think that kind of public accountability might actually be helpful for ensuring that my commitment remains strong, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. Over the next few days, I worked with the television producers to reshape the focus of the documentary. Instead of simply examining age discrimination and the Foundation's response to it, the program would explore the possibility of personal transformation in the face of harmful attitudes and behaviors. The interview itself took place in my home, with cameras positioned to capture both intimate conversation and the broader context of my daily life. The producer, a thoughtful woman named Sarah Chen, had clearly done her research and asked probing questions that went beyond surface-level discussion. Mrs. Sinclair, she began, can you tell us about the experience that led you to establish the Late Bloomers Foundation? I shared the story of Vanessa's cruel comments not to humiliate her, but to illustrate the real impact that age discrimination can have on people's sense of worth and belonging. I described the pain I had felt, the self-doubt her words had triggered, and the way the experience had motivated me to take action. How did you decide to respond with philanthropy rather than simply withdrawing or seeking personal revenge? I realized that my experience was not unique. There are countless older women who face similar dismissal and cruelty, often without the resources to fight back. Creating the foundation was a way to turn my pain into power, not just for myself, but for other women who needed support and advocacy. When it came time for Marcus and Vanessa's segments, I was impressed by their willingness to be honest about their failures. Marcus spoke candidly about his failure to defend me and his tendency to prioritize conflict avoidance over moral courage. Vanessa acknowledged the cruelty of her comments and the discriminatory attitudes they reflected. What I said to Mrs. Sinclair wasn't just rude, Vanessa told the camera. It was a form of age discrimination that reflected deeply problematic beliefs about the value and worth of older women. I was judging her based on her appearance rather than her character, her contributions, or her fundamental human dignity. What steps are you taking to address those problematic beliefs? Sarah asked. I'm working with a therapist to understand where these attitudes came from and how to change them. I'm volunteering with organizations that support older adults. I've made financial contributions to the Late Bloomers Foundation and other groups that fight age discrimination. And I'm committed to speaking publicly about these issues to help other people avoid making the same mistakes I made. Marcus discussed his own growth process. I learned that there's no neutral position when someone you love is being attacked. By failing to defend my mother immediately and definitively, I was essentially choosing to allow her to be treated cruelly. That's not the kind of man I want to be, and it's not the kind of son my mother deserved. The final segment of the program focused on the Foundation's work and the women it had helped. Carol, the displaced executive who was now running a successful consulting business, spoke about the impact of receiving support during a vulnerable time in her life. Mrs. Sinclair's foundation didn't just provide financial assistance, Carol explained. It provided validation that my experience and expertise still had value, even though some employers had written me off as too old to be useful. When the documentary aired 6 weeks later, the response was overwhelming. The Late Bloomers Foundation received hundreds of applications for grants, thousands of dollars in donations, and inquiries from organizations in other cities interested in creating similar programs. More importantly, the program sparked broader conversations about age discrimination and the value of older workers and community members. Social media was filled with people sharing their own stories of age-related bias and discussing ways to combat these harmful attitudes. Marcus called me the morning after the program aired. "Mom, I've gotten calls from colleagues, clients, and friends all day. Everyone is saying how proud they are of our family for turning a difficult situation into something positive. How do you feel about that response?" "I feel grateful that we found a way to make something good come from something that was initially just painful and embarrassing. And I feel proud of the work you're doing with the foundation." "And how do you feel about having your mistakes broadcast nationally?" "Honestly, it was terrifying. But it was also liberating in a way. I don't have to carry around the secret shame of how I failed you anymore. It's out there, I've acknowledged it, and now I can focus on doing better going forward." Vanessa had a similar reaction when she called later that day. "Margaret, I was so nervous about how people would respond to seeing me admit to being cruel to you, but the response has been surprisingly positive. People seem to appreciate the honesty and the commitment to change. Are you surprised by that?" "I am, actually. I expected people to be judgmental and dismissive. Instead, I've had several people reach out to share their own stories of learning to overcome discriminatory attitudes. It feels like the beginning of important conversations rather than the end of my reputation." 6 months after the documentary aired, I was invited to speak at a national conference on aging and workplace discrimination. As I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of hundreds of advocates, researchers, and policymakers, I thought about the journey that had brought me to that moment. The Late Bloomers Foundation had grown beyond anything I had initially imagined, providing support to over 200 women and expanding into research and policy advocacy. Marcus had become a regular volunteer, using his architectural skills to help older adults modify their homes for accessibility. Vanessa had been promoted at her marketing firm after proposing a campaign focused on challenging age stereotypes in advertising. The experience that led me to create the Late Bloomers Foundation was painful, I told the audience. Being told that my wrinkles were disgusting and that I was an embarrassment to my family was one of the most hurtful things I had ever experienced. But that pain became the catalyst for something larger than personal grievance. It became the foundation for social change. I looked out at the faces in the audience, many of them older women who had likely faced similar discrimination. We cannot control how other people choose to treat us, but we can control how we respond to that treatment. We can choose to internalize cruelty and diminish ourselves, or we can choose to transform that cruelty into fuel for positive action. After my speech, a woman in her 70s approached me during the reception. "Mrs. Sinclair, I wanted to thank you for your work. I saw the documentary when it aired, and it inspired me to start my own advocacy group in Phoenix. We've helped over 50 women in the past 6 months." Similar conversations continued throughout the evening. Women shared stories of starting businesses, returning to school, launching nonprofit organizations, and refusing to accept age-related limitations on their dreams and ambitions. The foundation had become more than a grant-making organization. It had become a movement. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. A year earlier, I had been living quietly in my suburban home, accepting an increasingly marginal role in my son's life and trying to find meaning in the aftermath of widowhood. Vanessa's cruelty had shattered that quiet existence, but in the process, it had also revealed strengths and purposes I hadn't known I still possessed. The relationship between Marcus, Vanessa, and me had evolved into something different from what any of us had expected. It was built on honesty rather than politeness, mutual respect rather than obligation, and shared purpose rather than just family ties. Vanessa had kept her commitments to volunteer work and continued education about age discrimination. Marcus had developed into a more courageous and principled man, willing to confront difficult situations rather than avoiding them. More importantly, our transformed relationships had become a model for other families dealing with similar issues. The foundation regularly received calls from adult children whose aging parents were facing discrimination, or from older adults whose families were not supportive of their continued growth and engagement. The evening of my return from the conference, I sat in my garden as the sun set, surrounded by the flowers Richard and I had planted together decades earlier. My phone buzzed with a text message from Vanessa. "Saw the coverage of your conference speech online. You continue to inspire me to be better. Thank you for seeing potential for change in me when I couldn't see it myself." I smiled, thinking about how different our relationship had become. The young woman who had once looked at me with contempt and called my wrinkles disgusting was now one of my closest collaborators in fighting age discrimination. Her transformation had been genuine and sustained, earning my respect and, eventually, my affection. Marcus arrived just as I was preparing to go inside, carrying takeout from the Chinese restaurant where he used to work as a teenager. "I thought you might be tired after your trip," he said, settling into the garden chair beside me. "Tell me about the conference." As we shared dinner in the garden, I told him about the women I had met, the programs being started in other cities, and the policy changes being discussed at state and federal levels. His questions were thoughtful and engaged, reflecting a genuine interest in the work, rather than just polite conversation. "Mom," he said, as we were cleaning up, "I've been thinking about something. The documentary and the foundation, and all the work you've been doing, it's changed how I see aging, and older adults in general, but it's also changed how I see you specifically." "In what way?" "Before all this happened, I think I had started to see you as someone who was winding down, whose best years were behind her. I loved you, but I guess I had unconsciously accepted that your role in life was becoming smaller and more passive. And now? Now I see that you're probably in the most impactful and meaningful phase of your entire life. You're affecting policy, changing lives, inspiring movements. You're more vital and powerful now than you've ever been." His words touched me deeply, because they reflected the truth I had discovered about myself over the past year. The woman who had been made to feel invisible and irrelevant had found her voice and her purpose in ways that exceeded anything she had accomplished in her earlier decades. "Marcus," I said, "do you remember what you asked me that night after the chamber dinner? You asked what would happen to our relationship." "I remember. I think we have our answer now. Our relationship is stronger than it was before, because it's based on mutual respect and shared values rather than just family obligation. We've both grown into better versions of ourselves through this experience." Even though it started with something so painful, especially because it started with something so painful, growth usually requires some kind of disruption to the status quo. Vanessa's cruelty disrupted our comfortable but shallow family dynamics and forced all of us to examine our values and choices. As Marcus left that evening, he hugged me with the genuine warmth I remembered from his childhood. "I'm proud of you, Mom, and I'm grateful that you didn't let us get away with treating you poorly." After he drove away, I sat on my front porch and looked up at the stars. The house felt different now than it had a year earlier. Instead of being a refuge from the world, it had become a headquarters for engaging with the world. Instead of being a place where I waited for other people to visit and bring meaning to my days, it had become a place where I planned activities and initiatives that brought meaning to other people's days. The woman who had been told her wrinkles were disgusting had discovered that her face, with all its lines and marks of experience, had become a symbol of resistance against age discrimination. The woman who had been called an embarrassment had become a source of pride and inspiration for her family and community. I thought about Vanessa's comment about smoothing out my financial future, which she had made in reference to cosmetic procedures. Instead, I had smoothed out her financial future by creating consequences for her cruelty that motivated genuine change and growth. The money I had used to establish the foundation hadn't just helped other women. It had helped transform the person who had tried to diminish me. The late bloomers the foundation served weren't just the women receiving grants and support. We were all late bloomers, discovering new possibilities and purposes in the later stages of our lives. Age had not diminished us. It had refined us, concentrated our wisdom and courage into forms that were more powerful than what we had possessed in our younger years. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked in the bathroom mirror at the face that had been the target of such cruel commentary. The wrinkles were still there, perhaps even deeper after a year of intensive work and travel. But the expression was different. Instead of showing hurt and uncertainty, my reflection showed confidence, purpose, and satisfaction. I had learned that true beauty came not from smooth skin or fashionable clothes, but from the courage to stand up for what was right, the wisdom to transform pain into purpose, and the strength to refuse to be diminished by other people's small-mindedness. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was someone I was proud to be, wrinkles and all. 5 years later, I stood before a packed auditorium delivering the keynote address at the International Conference on Aging with Dignity. The Late Bloomers Foundation had become a global movement, with chapters in 12 countries and over 10,000 women served. Marcus approached the podium as I finished, now serving as the foundation's board chair. Vanessa had left her corporate job to become our full-time program director, her transformation complete and authentic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, "my mother taught me that wrinkles aren't flaws to be hidden, but stories to be celebrated." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. In the front row, Vanessa wiped tears from her eyes, her own laugh lines now visible without shame. The woman who once called me disgusting had become my closest friend and most passionate advocate. That evening, at the Foundation's anniversary gala, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Secretary of Aging. But the moment that mattered most came when a young marketing executive approached me during cocktails. "Mrs. Sinclair," she said nervously, "I need to confess something. 5 years ago, I made cruel comments to my boyfriend's mother about her appearance. I saw your documentary and realized how wrong I was. I've been volunteering with senior services ever since, trying to make amends." Her honesty reminded me why this work mattered. Change was possible when people faced consequences and chose growth over defensiveness. Later that night, Marcus drove me home through familiar streets, now dotted with late bloomer community centers. "Mom, do you ever regret how this all started? The pain Vanessa caused you?" I considered his question as we passed the house where I had once felt invisible and unwanted. Without that pain, none of this transformation would have happened. Sometimes cruelty becomes the catalyst for the most important work of our lives. Vanessa still carries guilt about what she said to you. She should. Guilt can be productive when it motivates continued action. The day she stops feeling responsible for the harm she caused is the day she stops working to prevent others from causing similar harm. We pulled into my driveway, past the garden where I now hosted monthly gatherings for Foundation supporters. The house had been transformed into a hub of activity and purpose, no longer a quiet retreat, but a center of community engagement. "You know what I've learned?" Marcus said as we sat in the car. "True family isn't about avoiding conflict or keeping everyone comfortable. It's about holding each other accountable to be our best selves." That's wisdom that took you 40 years to learn. Better late than never, right? Isn't that the Foundation motto? "It's never too late to bloom," I corrected, smiling at his attempt at humor. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of my reflection one final time. At 73, my face showed every year of experience, every battle fought, every victory won. These weren't disgusting wrinkles anymore, they were proof of a life fully lived and meaningfully spent. The Foundation's work would continue long after I was gone. Vanessa had proven herself capable of leadership, Marcus had found his moral backbone, and thousands of women had discovered their own power to resist age discrimination and pursue their dreams. Sometimes the cruelest comments become the greatest gifts, forcing us to discover strength we never knew we possessed. My wrinkles had become my badge of honor, proof that I had refused to be diminished by others. Narrow vision of worth and beauty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.